Morning. So we've heard from Antony Blinken. As I mentioned, we'll talk more about that. But Canada, as part of the G7, also responding in a statement from G7 allies this morning as the foreign ministers wrap up their meeting for 3 days in Capri, Italy. Dominic Volitis has been covering the international reaction. And Dom, what are we hearing so far in response to Israel's move?
Morning, Heather. Well, let's go straight to that joint statement that has been released by the G7 foreign ministers. In it, they said, we urge all parties to work to prevent further escalation, adding the G7 will continue to work to this end. So a very short statement, but more broadly speaking, Heather, taking a wider view of the current situation in the Middle East, because of course all of this is linked. G7 foreign ministers also said today that they will hold Iran accountable for its malicious and destabilizing actions in the region. And at the same time, they voiced their opposition to a full-scale Israeli military operation in Rafah, warning that it would be catastrophic for civilians there. But back to Israel's apparent strike on Iran, and we've also heard today from Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Here's what he had to say about it. Take a listen.
The situation overnight, as you would appreciate, it's a developing situation. Significant escalation is not in anyone's interest. What we want to see is calm heads prevail.
This morning from the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. He's called for de-escalation, adding that Berlin would work with its partners to achieve that. We've also heard from the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who's currently in Finland meeting with the country's Prime Minister. And here's what she had to say about the news.
We have to do everything possible that all sides refrain from the escalation in that region. It is absolutely necessary that the region stays stable and that all sides refrain from further action.
Reaction to, Heather, coming from the Middle East this morning. Oman, which has acted as a mediator in the region, has condemned Israel's apparent attack. Jordan said Israeli-Iranian retaliations must end and has warned against the danger of regional escalation. The United Arab Emirates has called for the utmost restraint to avoid serious repercussions, while Egypt said it was deeply concerned about the continued mutual escalation between Israel and Iran and has warned of the consequences of expanding conflict and instability in the Middle East. Finally, China, in a statement, Beijing said it opposes any escalating tensions in the region. So some very early reaction for you this morning, Heather. If there is a single theme to it all, it is a call for both sides to show restraint to de-escalate. Heather.
Thank you so much, Dominic. Really appreciate that. Yes, the de-escalation message from U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken as he spoke in Italy. He did also announce, as he spoke to reporters, or reiterate that the U.S. has brought in new sanctions against Iran for its unprecedented attack against Israel. And he did say as well that G7 countries will adopt additional sanctions and other measures in the days ahead. So Canada, as a G7 nation, we will certainly be seeing what that entails for this country, and our Parliamentary Bureau working further on that. But on the notion of sanctions, as Sasha Petrusik tells us this morning, there is uncertainty and doubt around how much these additional sanctions can have any effect on Iran.
In Tehran, they seem to be celebrating a military victory, but it's all for show. Past Western sanctions may seem that way too, given their ineffectiveness. Now, Washington is doubling down, targeting individuals and entities responsible for making those drones aimed at Israel on Saturday. They missed their mark, but triggered the economic retaliation.
We will continue to disrupt the networks that support Iran's reckless proliferation of weapons.
The U.S. is also restricting the movement of Iranian diplomats at the UN in New York. Even its foreign minister can't go farther than 2 blocks.
Good afternoon.
Britain also promised new sanctions.
Not just because of what Iran has been doing, but also as a message to Israel that we want to play our part in having a coordinated strategy that deals with Iran's aggression.
Group of 7 ministers, including Canada and Europe, vowed close coordination.
We are on the edge of a war, a regional war in the Middle East, which will be sending shock waves.
Will the new sanctions deter Tehran?
In reality, they are not doing anything.
Not likely, says Iranian expert Syed Golkar, partly because Tehran cares more about religious ideology than battlefield victory.
Why you are doing that? It doesn't make sense from a rational point of view, but it makes sense from the ideologic one.
Golkar and others say Western pressure and even retaliation from Israel may count less to Iran than what it's gaining in the Mideast. Support from Palestinians as the only country to intervene militarily against Israel since the Gaza war began.
That is Sasha Petrusik from Washington this morning. Now, again, back to Antony Blinken, as I was mentioning, reiterating the fact the U.S. has brought in additional sanctions against Iran and saying that other G7 countries will soon follow suit. As he gave his remarks to reporters at the conclusion of this G7 foreign ministers meeting, he pointedly would not answer reporters' questions and would not speak to any details of Israel's strike on Iran. He did say over and over again that the U.S. focus remains on de-escalation.
I'm not going to speak to that, except to say that the United States has not been involved in any offensive operations. What we're focused on, what the G7 is focused on, and again, it's reflected in our statement and in our conversation, is our work to de-escalate tensions, to de-escalate from any potential conflict. You saw Israel on the receiving end of an unprecedented attack, but our focus has been on, of course, making sure that Israel can effectively defend itself, but also de-escalating tensions, avoiding conflict, and that remains our focus.
Let's bring you more on this out of Washington. Benji Heyer is with me this morning. Benji, listening there to Antony Blinken. Interestingly, not answering those questions, even though Italy's foreign minister had said that the U.S. had advance notice from Israel just a short time before the attack. What are you hearing there in Washington, additionally, from the U.S. on these overnight moves?
Heather, good morning. I don't know how those comments from the Italian foreign minister will go down here in Washington. We're yet to get official comment from the White House, but we have had that press conference, of course, from Antony Blinken in Italy. The human embodiment almost of de-escalation. And despite not speaking much about the operation, he says that the US was not involved in it, that it didn't greenlight the response. We've been hearing from administration officials in the past 12 hours or so that the United States did not endorse this retaliation by Israel, but it was aware of it. The Italian foreign minister pointing to that, that it says Washington was informed at the very last minute. Of course, the US has been calling for restraint for many days now from Israel, not wanting to create a further escalation of tensions, a wider conflict. It had pushed Israel to accept a retaliation in the form of economic sanctions, for example, the likes that we saw unveiled from the US, from the UK, from the European Union on Thursday. But the hints from Tel Aviv have consistently been, from Jerusalem as well, that there would be a response, and this is exactly what we've seen in the past 12 hours or so. What's noteworthy, though, especially in what we've been hearing from Israel, which is very little, from Iran, which is again very little, downplaying this event, is certainly a sense that that neither side want to see this descend into a regional war, that this could well be the end of the tit-for-tat strikes and retaliation. And certainly the comments, or lack thereof, that we've been hearing from Antony Blinken this morning goes to show that the best way to tone it down is, well, to not really talk about it at all.
He was keen to talk about what is going on in Gaza and Hamas, and also the planned Israeli offensive in Rafah. And he was very strong, Benji, in terms of saying the U.S. does not support any major military action in the south of Gaza. He was asked directly by the BBC journalist there about the U.S.-Israel relationship. Where does that stand right now?
Well, this has been fascinating to view from Washington in the past couple of months. At the very start of this conflict, Joe Biden said he was unreservedly standing by Israel's side. But of course, that relationship with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu following Israel's offensive in Gaza has become much more difficult in the past couple of months, especially in light of those plans unveiled by Israel to move further into the south of the Palestinian territory. Antony Blinken again reaffirming in the past couple of minutes that a military operation in southern Gaza in Rafah would, quote, have terrible consequences. There have also been yesterday a vote in the United Nations Security Council to try to give the Palestinian state full membership at the UN. That was vetoed by the US. You kind of have this bizarre contrast where we have statements saying that Israel needs to still show caution in its operations. We've had pretty stark condemnation at times from the administration here, but at the same time, kind of ironclad support for Israel in major world bodies. The G7 statement that's come out this morning says that Israel and its people have our full solidarity and support as we reaffirm our commitment towards Israel's security. And there will certainly be hope that despite those calls from Washington for restraint, wanting to avoid a wider conflict and for Israel not to strike back against Iran, the fact that this strike, that it did happen, that it was limited, almost symbolic, is perhaps designed to ensure that conflict goes no further, and that will provide a sense of reassurance here in the US and perhaps, at least the hope here is, not worsen any sort of relationship between the governments here and the government in Israel.
Benji, I very much appreciate the reporting. Thank you.